It always feels like the football season is just a little bit closer when you know exactly when the teams are kicking off. So that's good to see some kickoff times. We got them for the first couple of weeks for FSU, playing the earliest that Florida State has ever played by a few hours. So we will talk about that. We got George here to break down Florida State football for us on Seminoles Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you all stopping by. Pull up for the next few minutes, and we're talking FSU. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat. We appreciate any contributions as well. Georgitis, the Renegade Report. George, what's going on tonight?
Man, we are hanging out in this Florida heat here. Just trying to make it through the hot in the daytime, freezing cold at night, desert of the off season here. As what is it today? May the 15th, I believe. Just wanting to inch closer and closer to the season, but we're surviving. We're having some fun. We still been doing our 4 shows every week, so we just hanging in there, Mark. We ready to see some football, man. I think everybody's like the football fever is at its max right now.
And when George says he's hanging out in the Florida heat, I'm hanging out in the Florida heat now too. I'm right there with you and James and Chris. We're all hanging out in the Florida heat. And George and I have had a couple of conversations in the last few weeks where George was dodging thunderbolts and raindrops, and I was always like, man, it hasn't hit here yet. But last night, it hit. It was serious last night. It was serious.
That cell made it over. This cell made it over there. Huh? I imagine the Atlantic Ocean helps you out a lot with pushing stuff away from y'all. Some of this stuff, it dies when it hits that cold water over there. But yeah, you'll have plenty, I'm sure. These thunderstorms we get down here, it's not even dog days yet. But once it gets into dog days, it's like you just count on it from 2 to 5 every day. You're getting that sure enough thunderstorm to come along. But yeah, we'll survive. But you guys, y'all are ganging up on me on the East Coast over there. Chris is about to move to Tallahassee. I needed him to come on and so we can try to even this thing out. But yeah, you, Chris, and James, y'all are all within, an hour drive of each other. That's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. We will have to get together at some point. All right, George. Well, we've got a date against Georgia Tech, and that's not in Atlanta. It's not in Tallahassee. It's nowhere close to what we're talking about being an hour away. No, over in Dublin, remember, everybody. This is the first time that FSU is headed overseas as a 13-point favorite. So we've got our kickoff time. So Florida State's going to be kicking off at 5 local time, but no. That's a noon kickoff for us watching the game on ESPN. So ESPN has lined that up one for Georgia Tech and Florida State, noon Eastern time. The next week, it's Boston College. And again, good play on Florida State's part. I don't know what they've done. I don't know who they've negotiated with. Obviously, they've worked things out with ESPN. They figured it out. And of course, it helps being a big draw because they get their preference. But I have always thought that this was brilliant. 4th consecutive year, regardless of the opponent. We've seen Notre Dame. We've seen Virginia Tech. We've seen, who the heck was it last year? The last 2 years, LSU. Sunday night, all by themselves. Actually going to be a Labor Day night. Monday night. So ESPN's lined it up with a game on Sunday. That's a good place to be. Or on Monday night. Last year it was Florida State, LSU. It was Clemson, Duke. So the ACC actually did something right there in putting their marquee teams on by themselves. So there's no competition. I think that's brilliant. Even if it's Boston College, people want to watch college football. They got to watch Florida State.
Well, now the question is, why would they do that, Mark?
Why would ESPN do that or Florida State?
Well, I mean, no, ESPN and Florida State, that's crystal clear why we want to be in the dark because it's September. It's going to be 110 degrees during the day. The people watching all that stuff, ESPN for the same reason. But according to the ACC, this is an evil thing. Every conference member, they pull their own weight. Florida State doesn't deserve any extra money. It's not like they're the ones that are pulling this conference, holding it on their back. So why is it that every chance they get, Florida State is the one that's on Monday night, on Friday night, whatever the case may be, as you've said. So it just goes to prove everything, we've kind of talked about. I think Bud Elliott had a pretty funny tweet, if I can look it up pretty quick, because the ACC, they coalesced pretty quick to admitting, yeah, okay, The SEC, the Big Ten, based on what they've done, yeah, you know what I mean? They should get those amount of buys, that amount of money. We're the ACC, we're fine with the lesser amount. But within the conference itself, no, we're not going to do that. But this is how we word it. ACC teams accepting conference playoff revenue share based on who has earned it. Yeah, sure, seems fair. ACC teams divvying up the revenue amongst themselves based on who earned it. Oh, heavens no, absolutely not. So that's how we get to the situation we're in, where Florida State, Clemson, and now even in North Carolina is really, really starting to look like they're at a point where they're ready to get the hell out of here, and there is no other real option. I'm not sure if you've seen the comments from the board of trustees, the different people over at North Carolina, but basically saying, there is no other option but to pursue a higher revenue league. The guy, I think his name was Boliak, one of the trustees that had the best quotes, kind of really biting into the ACC. He just came out and said, that's it. That's the only, something major has to happen. He threw out a single line that says, or maybe it reconstructs itself. But that reconstruction, the only way you could possibly have that to where you continue as a quote unquote power conference, you'd have to keep the same amount of playoff buys, the same amount of capital, and you'd have to shrink down to like 8 teams and add Notre Dame. Like, that's the only way you could do that on a per capita basis. Adding Cal, adding Stanford, all that did was doom it. Like, those are replacement teams for a lower level. So that reconstruction that he speaks of, that would be without Florida State, Clemson, and North Carolina, in my opinion. And he was just throwing that out there, so it just didn't seem like he was one way, just saying, F the ACC, we got to close this thing off. But interesting was the actual AD, Bubba Cunningham's response when they asked him about it, at those winter meetings, and kind of, did you bring all this up? The issues of trustees that everybody has at the meeting? Well, no, with the situation that the conference is currently in, kind of like a dire mode with being sued from all these different places, it wasn't the right, it didn't seem relevant, or whatever the case may be, to bring it up there. But no, I think I totally disagree. I think that would be the perfect time, and that is the problem, is the suits and the conference reconfiguration that's going to happen inevitably here soon. So it would have been the perfect time. I kind of had the feeling maybe UNC is going to have to get him out of there to move forward with whatever they're going to do, if they're actually going to enter the fray. But as Jen pointed out, and I kind of pick on her a little bit because, I try to be a little bit more serious about this stuff, but they're just kind of whining now when you've been part of the problem. Like, you were the guys that have been toting water for these guys all these years. It was your alumni talking to your alumni under the pine trees there, swinging pine trees, as they wrote it in that paper, all those years ago, when you decided to keep Raycom on life support. I think I talked about it when we did the little spot last week. John Swofford was a forward-thinking guy in the 80s. He was like, man, even though we're the richest now and basketball's king, I'm telling you right now, the money in the future is going to be football TV contracts. And they got ahead of it. Like, that's how they got Florida State to join the contract. They were forward-thinking, all these things. But then when you get into 2000, on it to 2008, a little bit long in the tooth, it was more about not taking risks, not taking chances, all them things he preached in the 80s. And it was more about just getting his nest egg for him, his mom, or I don't know about his mom, excuse me. God rest her soul, his wife, his daughter, all these different positions, and kind of retire. That's what the outside perception is. And I think if there's one thing we're learning more and more in this country, if it's, smells like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, even though some real important people may be telling you it's a pigeon, it's probably a damn duck. Excuse my French.
Absolutely. The thing about North Carolina is that that makes them a little bit different than everyone else. And this isn't that they're more popular or bring more TV revenue or anything like that, because we've got a pretty clear distinction. Florida State, Clemson, actually Louisville's done a little bit better than Miami the last 10 years or so. Miami's right there, of course. But basketball, North Carolina is king. The North Carolina Duke game, obviously. But North Carolina, they kind of represent the ACC. They kind of represent the ACC being a basketball conference when all the other conferences were football conferences. The ACC, yes, they now make more money in football, but like you say, way back when, a basketball conference, and people think ACC, they think basketball because shoot, I threw up the national championships in basketball since the year 2000, and it's still the ACC by far over everybody else, 9-3. And I laid out in a video, folks, you can check that out in regards to what North Carolina brings to the table. But man, they are the ACC, and if the ACC loses North Carolina, sure, Florida State's an enormous loss. North Carolina is a huge loss, but they're almost, in a way, Florida State's a bigger loss. North Carolina is almost like a symbolic loss. Like if you lose North Carolina, you've kind of lost the ACC.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Florida State and Clemson 1-2 on the field results, on the money being brought in. There's no mistake. But as you mentioned, North Carolina, Duke, that is the ACC. It's like kind of, as I alluded to, there's so many North Carolina alumni that are employed at the ACC league office. All the way around, kind of everything, all the arms that reach, all their credibility, not all of it, but a whole lot of it comes from North Carolina. Even back to, like I said, Skipper at ESPN was a North Carolina graduate that you're doing business. That's this whole good old boy network that allowed all these things to happen. So once North Carolina bows out, like, who's your advocate? Who is the person with the rich history and this and that? I mean, at that point, it's just after Florida State and Clemson, you could argue, okay, is it Miami? Is it Louisville? Is it North Carolina? That's the next this or that. But yeah, North Carolina is firmly entrenched. The way the state laws are there, the way that they're connected with NC State, and the way that their dealings with the conference are handled by the state and things of that nature. Yeah, North Carolina is 10 times worse than losing a Miami that's just a private institution drawing a check from you. So yeah, I agree 100% with you there.
Chris Frazier, Spear Addicts, dropping by. We always appreciate Chris, his busy schedule. Get on over to Spear Addicts. He's all over Florida State football on a regular basis. Chris will set you up with where we stand on this conversation. You can jump in anywhere you want to go with this. Of course, we're addressing the ACC meetings. North Carolina's made a big splash here in the last couple of days in regards to comments that have been made that I'm sure you're well aware of. And of course, Florida State, Mike Alford is saying all the right things, participating at ACC Media Days, that still has good relationships with the commissioner and the other administrators there in the ACC. And he seems to have their support, and that they seem to not, they're fully engaged in these meetings. But is there anything in regards to any kind of angles at the ACC meetings that are catching your attention?
Yeah, the ACC is kissing everyone's rear end now. I mean, that's standing out pretty heavily in the facts of now that you've got people like Duke asking questions. You've got obviously North Carolina asking questions. North Carolina's probably the next one in line we've been saying that for a while. But now you've got Virginia, that their athletic director started asking some questions. And then you turn around and Virginia Tech said something to Jim Phillips about the college football playoff committee portion of it. All of this wasn't publicized, but it's the conversations that are happening that are not public that are the most fun. So when you've got someone like Virginia Tech, you've got someone, and Miami will never admit this, but you've got Miami's athletic director asking these questions. Hey, why didn't we stick up for Florida State as a conference when they were 13-0 and won the ACC championship? Because if you won't stand up for a Florida State, which could arguably be the biggest football brand in the conference, if you're not going to stick up for them to get them in the college football playoff, then what makes us believe that you'll do it for us if we go on a run? So when those questions get asked, and then you've got Jim Phillips coming out and just completely, I don't know if he doesn't remember 5 months ago or if he's trying to insert a new memory from something that didn't happen. Maybe he dreamed of doing this at one point. But he says that he came out and stood up for Florida State against the college football committee, and all of these BS comments that he made. You barely did it today publicly when you stated that you came out and you stood for Florida State and said that they should be in the playoffs. But you never said that publicly anywhere as it was happening. The only thing that you said is congratulations to Florida State on winning an ACC championship, and them being left out of the college football playoff is outrageous. That's all that was said. That was after the fact. After the top four were announced, all of that. But you saw a commissioner from SEC. You saw the commissioner from the Big Ten. You saw the commissioner from wherever the hell Texas came from, Big 12, whatever it was, Pac 12, whatever they were. They were out there on ESPN, Fox, and CBS saying why their team should be in. Well, they only lost one game, or they only did this. They beat the number one team in the country. They won the SEC title. How can you leave them out? There was multiple conversations that all of the other conference commissioners were doing where you had the ACC was completely quiet. Now, he's stating because it's a 12-team playoff that the ACC has to get multiple teams into the playoff. We're not going to get multiple teams into the playoff. It's almost impossible with the way that it's designed.
Thanks to you.
And he's like, well, I'm not happy with the negotiations of how it went, but I negotiated hard. So you're just telling us how you failed. But you tried really, really hard. That's why there are those that say and there are those that do. And Phillips and the ACC is nothing but a conference that says that they try and they do their best, and they're not happy with the outcome any more than the members are, and all of the BS that follows along with that. Just say it. You're a puppet to ESPN, and you're a puppet underneath SEC, and your joke is a conference. You can't do anything for anyone. You can't even help yourself in this matter because you go around and say the most outrageous, ignorant things after the fact that nothing was said before, and you sit right here on national television and lie and say that you fought for Florida State to get in the playoff. It's a bold-faced lie. So the question was asked. Now, they didn't publicize this on ACC Network, but the question was asked. There will be an article come out about this. So what exactly did you say publicly or not publicly to the College Football Playoff Committee to try to get Florida State in? No comment. Wow. But you just told everybody on the network that how does this work? How do you have no comment now? So Phillips is nothing more than another puppet. He's going to say whatever he's told to say, do whatever he's told to do. He's a do boy. He's a terrible representative for all of the members of the ACC. The ACC is a terrible representative to be considering themselves a conference. The whole thing with the law situation that's going on with Florida State, North Carolina, or the one that's going on, and it doesn't matter anymore. Why do people, when I say that, I've had many questions. Why does it not matter anymore? What's the problem? What's changing? Just trust me when I tell you it does not matter what happens anymore. The rest of it will take care of itself. How can that happen? All I can tell you is you're going to have one extra member July 1st. The other two can't come until August the 2nd. So it won't matter here in about 2 or 3 weeks. It just doesn't matter anymore. So everyone gave the ACC this opportunity at these meetings to try to gain some ground, show face, do something. And I'm telling you that there wasn't one member of this conference that was pleased with what they received. They all have figured out we're looked at as less than. So, and that's because of y'all being looked at as less than. It's not because of our brand. It's not because of Florida State's brand. It's not because of anyone else, but that you guys can't do your due diligence and do your job and represent us the way that we're supposed to be represented.
He even went to talking about repeating ESPN's talking points about injuries and we need to look at scheduling and things. I was just sitting there just like, you SOB, man. I agree with what Chris said 100%. I'm glad he got here to say that because right on the nail, nail right on the head.
So to extend on what Chris is saying, if I'm interpreting this correctly, because you three, meaning Chris, George, James, started making these comments when you guys started to hear the comments out of guys like Kirk Herbstreit 3-4 weeks before the end of the season. Before Jordan Travis was injured, you guys started to make comments on here, and I'm sure you talked about it much more on your own platforms, that was the time for Jim Phillips to see what was going on.
Mhm.
If he was truly acting as a conference commissioner autonomously apart from ESPN, but if he was just playing along with, okay, well, ESPN's driving this and we're going to get what we get. But if he was acting on behalf of his conference, or I can't believe he's that ignorant and naive. He's smarter than that. He's arrived at this position for a reason. He's smarter than that. So he should have been out in front of the rhetoric to say, this is starting to set up in a bad way. I got to get ahead of this and start really pushing, driving this narrative, getting it out there in the public that people know this is how this is going down. And I can't allow this. And we need to start fighting before the battle's lost, and then throw up our hands and say, this is outrageous.
Without a doubt, man. It really hit ahead before that UNA game. They did a whole 10-minute segment on College Game Day about why the ACC should be the conference left out and all the things. And this is before Jordan Travis was ever even injured. You look at championship weekend, they had the SEC commissioner in studio at halftime of the Florida State game giving a fiery speech on why Bama should be in over Florida State. Jim Phillips nowhere to be found. Like you said, weeks before, it was obvious kind of what was being set up. Whether you want to call it just cheering for your team, putting your opinion out there, whatever Kirk Herbstreit's out as he gives himself, or all the people like Josh Pate who kind of changed their opinion, Greg McElroy, these different people. There was obviously a campaign out there for Florida State to be left out. And there was a campaign for them to be in, but it was 100% from the fans. And you're only going to get so much from Norvell and the players because they're locked in doing what they're supposed to do. And we've talked about it before, preaching the system of the climb and working and doing all the things right. Like his guys did exactly what they were supposed to do. You couldn't ask anything more from them. They did it all. So it's like it was up to somebody, whether it be somebody with a conscience in that playoff room, be it the commissioner, not the commissioner, the NC State athletic director that was in that room, Jim Phillips, whoever it is, as an entity, the ACC at a corporate level did not support FSU whatsoever, didn't do really anything to go on any kind of promotional tour for ACC to be conference champions. When you have a team that's in the top like that, up for a playoff, you see the SEC commissioners, Big Twin, like Chris was saying, you go to ESPN, it's like a big deal. You go on like nightly talk shows, all the car washes and things, and you talk about how Florida State, they're the team to beat. It was just none of that. He was absolutely silent. And it's really sickening to hear him. But I love those, kind of behind the scenes quotes and questions that Chris had. And I'm sure, like he alluded to, like, I'm sure it's the straw that broke the camel's back. They're asking like, what the hell? Why didn't we do this? Why didn't we do that? Now that we're looking back on it, man, this is sure, screwed up. So at the very least, even the people that were in on it and colluding to, get this thing stretched out, keep the things the same way they are, they've got to imagine, well, shit, when Florida State and Clemson are gone, I might be the next biggest thing around. So what are they going to do for me when I'm in that spot? So excuse my language, but
and if you're a conference commissioner, you can get airtime whenever you want it. You could be
anytime.
calling the Colin Cowherd show one day. He'll put you on. You could be making the rounds. Exactly right.
Well, the funniest portion of this is to me, like, I'm not here blaming Alabama for getting in. I'm not blaming Texas for getting in. That decision wasn't made by them to get in. But I do think it's funny that the College Football Playoff Committee, and I also think that it's hilarious that ESPN and so on knew months before. What if it was before the season started? Everybody knew Nick Saban last year was the year, this last year that just happened. Is it just a big coincidence that ESPN was pushing the narrative before Jordan Travis got hurt? Is it just a coincidence that Bama needed to get in for the last year that Coach Saban was going to be a head coach at Alabama? Was it a coincidence that as soon as that's over, he still has some type of position at Alabama? Is it just a coincidence that he's getting hired by ESPN to be on College Game Day? Is all of it it's just a big coincidence that all these things took place? It's just a big coincidence that the ACC did not speak up for Florida State or its conference members in periodness, because you could have had the argument that this was the best year that the ACC's had maybe ever. They had 11 teams playing a bowl game. It's the most that we've ever had playing a bowl game in one season. So 11 of your conference members played in a bowl game, so they beat each other up. That's an argument. Am I saying that it's true? Am I saying that this was the best ACC has ever looked? Maybe combined together, this might be the best that they've ever looked, because 11 of them made it to a bowl game. So your weakness status that some of those would like to put out there, well, that's the ACC. They're not the SEC. They're not the Big Ten. They're not this. They're not that. But 11 of our teams made it to a bowl game, whereas one of them went 13-0, winning the ACC championship without its starting quarterback. Everybody talks about, well, Jordan went down, that's why we didn't let him in. So you're telling me it's not more impressive that you go beat a top 20 or top 10, whatever they were, Louisville offensive team, beating them without your starting quarterback. Your defense dominates the game, but that's less impressive because you're without Jordan Travis. To me, that's more impressive. You had less tools to use to win that football game. Everybody played a game of almost perfection on defense for sure. And, they don't deserve to be in, or they're not good enough to be in. It's all wound together.
I'm going to play devil's advocate when it comes to that. So my devil's advocate position is, if somebody would have asked me, and I was obviously asked, and even if I wasn't asked, this is my job, this is what I do, is talk about college football every day. So my opinion's out there every day. Was Florida State one of the 4 best teams in the nation at the end of the season without Jordan Travis? My answer would be no, in my opinion. However, if I was asked and gave my opinion, should Florida State be in the college football playoffs based on what they've accomplished, based on what everyone's accomplished, and based on the resume, my answer was always yes, that they should be in the playoffs. So the committee should be making selections that are logical. So they should include Florida State. However, they've got a huge out, and they always have since day one in 2014, that they are charged to select the 4 best teams. And they can pull that injury card. Now, what didn't make sense, so I'm flipping back to Florida State, what didn't make sense is that they didn't play the card when the injury happened. They kept Florida State in a position. And again, I'll go back to the rankings and the games the weekend of championship play when Florida State was what were they going into the championship game? Were they number 3?
Yeah.
I can't even remember. 3 or 4, yeah.
They were 3 or 4. They were in the playoff. And they were playing Louisville, who I believe was 13th in the country. And Texas was playing number 19 or 20, 21, Oklahoma State. And we can go back and forth about who was more impressive. Florida State's defense was more impressive. Texas's offense was more impressive. Florida State beat a team with a better resume in Louisville. And how do you fall from 4 to or 3 to 5 or 4 to 5? And how does Texas and Alabama, how do they move their way above you, especially the Texas example? And of course, Texas beat Bama. So Bama's really the one that shouldn't have been in.
So that's why I want to address the front half of what you said there. Like, I get it, because there's opinions. You can do a power ranking, like a legit, like, take away what you deserve power ranking at any time. But when you want to talk about, okay, well, I don't know if Florida State was a top 4 team without their quarterback. Okay, well, let's examine the evidence. They lost their quarterback, and there was only 2 or 3 games that were played. When you go look at the teams that supposedly the evidence for why FSU isn't as good as Bama, isn't as good as Texas, all these different teams, rivalry week, they had as bad or worse issues with worse teams or as bad a teams as the Florida team we faced, and like didn't beat them as good. Like Alabama needed a miracle to beat Auburn, and you just agreed on that one. It's like Texas did lose to an Oklahoma team. It's like, yeah, sure, you could possibly, do that. We could argue that. But like you said, they never pulled that card out before of, oh, well, we can just choose the best teams. So we're going to leave out the undefeated Power Five. That's always been, and they've came out right and said that. If all things are equal, it can be a determining factor. But all things weren't equal. You had two teams with losses. Like, that's the big, that's the huge stink about it all. But other, from a Florida State perspective, it's like, that's it's pure opinion, which is fine. We all do it and stuff, but it's just like, I can't, just flex, just like capitalize enough how just outrageous it was that it happened.
What about that we had a true freshman quarterback with more passing yards in his conference championship game than what you saw Michigan's quarterback get? 3 weeks in a row, our true freshman quarterback had better yards than Michigan's quarterback. Not to mention the facts of, this is how I look at it. Alabama lost to a Texas team lost to an Oklahoma team. Therefore, Bama lost to a team that lost to Oklahoma. There's, whether they're good win or good losses or ugly losses, they still go down as a loss. Where you had a team that had a true freshman quarterback, you had 3 opportunities to take them out with a lesser quarterback, and somehow they still won all 3 of those games. Did they win by the skin of their teeth? No. They won a conference championship on a team that was supposedly one of the best offenses in the country? Yes. You only allowed them to score 6 points? Yes. But, your quarterback play isn't as good as the other 3 teams, because that was what they said. They didn't just say because you lost Jordan Travis to an injury. They said because your quarterback play isn't up to par with the other 4 teams. Now, if you was to use that subjective of what they're using, that subject, the gentleman that won the national title had the worst stats as a quarterback in the past 6 games out of all the teams, including 5 and 6. You had worse stats than Georgia's quarterback. You had worse stats than Florida State's quarterback. You had worse stats than Bama's quarterback. You had worse stats than Texas. You had worse stats than Washington's. Statistically, if you're going to use that, then you have to use it.
They never thought Washington was a top 4 team either until the very end. That's what gets me. If the top 4 teams are what they thought, Oregon would have been in the playoff. It's like, geez Louise. But yeah, what's his name was throwing for just god awful 100, 115, 120 yards a game, stuff like that. And
Well,
especially that Alabama-Auburn game.
Wasn't throwing the ball very often, but yeah, I don't think we need to defend JJ McCarthy. He's a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. So,
bust.
What does that have to do with EJ Manuel was the first round pick in the
I understand
draft,
that,
but if there was the
JJ McCarthy, the last 4 games of the year did not have bad games. He just didn't throw the ball often. You're not going to throw for too many yards in the national championship game when you throw the ball 18 times. You're not going to throw the ball for many yards when you throw 20 times against Michigan.
How many times do you think Brock Glenn was throwing it in the How many times do you think Brock Glenn was throwing it in the national championship game?
Well,
you think he was throwing it 40 times?
I understand that, but we can't make a comparison between JJ McCarthy and Brock Glenn. That's not a comparison.
They did.
So
I understand that, but JJ McCarthy is 10 times better than Brock Glenn.
All you have is what's on paper and on film. So.
I understand, but we know who's a better quarterback. We know that Brock Glenn's not going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft.
I don't know that. He was a true freshman last year, Mark. How do I know he won't be a top 5? I don't know that.
Well, I don't know it, but he's not, as a freshman quarterback, a top 5 pick in the NFL draft.
But the question would be, is he a better quarterback as a true freshman than McCarthy was?
No, the question is, was he a better quarterback as a true freshman than McCarthy was as a senior? Because that's the comparison.
According to the statistics, yes.
Well, no, he's not a better quarterback than JJ McCarthy.
But according to the statistics, he is.
Not the statistics I'm looking at. JJ McCarthy was like a top 5 or 10 quarterback in the country statistically.
Well, yeah, he played every game, didn't he?
Well, I'm talking about his passer rating. What was his passer rating last year?
3 games versus 13, Mark. I agree. He
Well,
better have a
no.
better
Passer rating's an average. You could lead you could have the best passer rating in the country and play 1 game. That's not a statistical compilation of yardage. That's a rating.
So what was his rating?
So Michigan was number 8 in the country in passer rating. He threw 22 touchdowns and 4 picks. Okay, let's not argue J.J. McCarthy and Brock Glenn. I don't think that's an argument.
Well,
The argument for Florida State is that they went undefeated, that they earned a college football playoff appearance, that if the committee was going to rate the quarterback as an issue and that it was truly an issue, then they did it late in the game after Florida State proved that they could win games with a backup, with a third-string quarterback, and beat a higher-ranked team than Texas did, and they leaped Florida State after Texas beat a lower-ranked team in a conference championship game. So that was all unfair. Absolutely, it was unfair. And maybe the worst statement that I heard out of the committee consistently is that Florida State was significantly, I may be messing up exactly the verbiage, but was significantly a worse team was not the same team without Jordan Travis. Well, if they're not the same team, then you don't drop them 1 spot. If your rankings are reflecting your actual opinion, then be truthful about it. Then drop them to 14 or 18 or something. But the top 8 teams in the country for most of last season, and especially down the stretch, you could put a razor close edge between all of them: Oregon, Washington, Ohio State, Michigan, Florida State, Alabama, Georgia, and who am I missing? Texas. Oh, they were razor close until the end. So if you're significantly worse without Jordan Travis, then rank them appropriately. Just don't patronize them by dropping them to number 5.
So would the question have helped if I would have compared Brock Glenn to Jalen Milroe?
Well, Jalen Milroe is not as good a quarterback at this point in his career as J.J. McCarthy. Sure.
So the argument,
and Michigan had an undefeated football team, so Michigan's really not in the conversation.
That wasn't the issue to begin with.
It's more about Texas and
clearly
Bama.
What they said we wasn't in for. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, if you're going to point to something to say, oh, well, Florida State shouldn't be in because of their quarterback, you can't point to J.J. McCarthy whether you think he has the potential to be a top. Like, he just wasn't a big part of their offense. You know, he was, don't throw picks and let's do this thing. Obviously, Jalen Milroe had 3.5 seconds to pass and still was getting sacked at the highest rate in the country. It damn sure ain't him. So it's like, okay, well, the guy out in Washington, Phoenix, okay, put him in. He's undefeated. He won his conference champion, but you never believed him in him either. You thought it was Oregon and other teams. You only put them in there once they kept on winning and beat Oregon, twice, or whatever the case may be. So it's like, you can't, it's not like the other 3 teams had Heisman winners at quarterback. They had, guys with potential, but they weren't out there winning the game for nobody. J.J. McCarthy was not winning the game for Michigan. Jalen Milroe, is what it is. He wasn't winning the game for Alabama, as in he just wasn't winning it. He wasn't enough for them to win. That's why they lost to Texas, and that's why they lost in the first round of the playoffs. Florida State, more than any team except for maybe Michigan on this list, they changed their offense. They switched things around. They had a better defense, in my opinion, than anybody. And they were going to come in and run the ball and just throw it when they had to. And also, another thing that wasn't taken into account whatsoever is that Brock Glenn had like less than a week to prepare. This got kind of thrown out there that there's any chance he might have been a little bit better than what you saw out there after a month with one of the guys whose track record on preparation, when you have time like that, stuff like his track record is, greatly shown out there, beating LSU back year, blowing them out at the beginning of the year, stuff like that. So there's a million things. We can get into it all, but you guys
would have to admit it was an ugly offensive performance against Louisville.
It was pretty enough to win.
I don't.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Go ahead, Chris.
It was pretty enough to win. That's what matters.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, sure. If we're just talking about wins, yeah, then we shut down the
What else should
competition in
matter?
13
What
to
did
0. I'm just
Alabama's
saying it
offensive
wasn't a good
performance look
offensive
like?
performance.
It
I
was
think we
better
can
than
all
it was
agree
better
on
than
that.
Bama's. What was Bama's like?
Bama's against Georgia
Not against Georgia,
in the
against
SEC
Auburn.
championship game.
Against Auburn.
Well,
What did they look
we're-
like in that game? That should have
we're-
eliminated them for the playoffs outright if what you're saying is true about the competition level in the ACC championship game. Then Alabama should not even have been in consideration. They already had a damn loss. So
yeah, I'm not
you
arguing
getting
that. I'm
into an
just saying that
offense looking
Florida State
ugly
had
in
a
a
bad
single
offensive
zone,
game
like,
against Louisville.
no, we get you're right, but it's like saying that you have to admit that all the different every team has warts. It's like you can have one not so good offensive game. I just don't see how that is in any way a basis to take a team out of the playoff.
No,
It's
I agree with you.
it's insane.
I agree with you. Of course. Yeah.
I know we haven't ran Wildcat all year long, and we run Wildcat
that's the other
against
thing.
Louisville and win the game.
I think a lot of people are saying that shit and didn't watch the game because the performance Lawrence Philly had was out of this world. Like there was never a time when the offense needed to go show out and do these things. I mean, it dominated the entire game. When we needed yards, we got it. I think Philly ran for 10 yards per carry in the game. It was but it's just a touchy subject for us, obviously. Just aggravating. We're opening up old wounds to make content. My God,
I came away from the ACC championship game thinking, okay, this was a dominant defensive performance. Louisville's not a great offense, but they're a good offense, and nobody else did this to them. So I came away with that. I came away with, okay, you got to understand that even though Florida State had 13 points until they scored a field goal, they beat them 16-6. That you're going to play if your defense is that dominant, you're going to play a conservative game. There's all sorts of teams that do that. Michigan does that all the time. Your defense is dominating. There's no reason to risk it with a freshman quarterback, so you don't need to score 35 points. So your defense is in control of the game. So I came away with it thinking that was a convincing win. The game wasn't close. It wasn't a blowout. Louisville was certainly within contact of trying to do something. They think, what's his name? Plummer threw a pick in the end zone that could have made things different, but Florida State made the play about halfway through the fourth quarter. And Florida State was clearly the better team, wasn't even close, over the 13th ranked team in the country. That's what I took away from the ACC championship game.
Yeah. It's everybody's got all these reasons for FSU, but none of it applies to any of the other teams. There's just it's aggravating. But we'll get data. We'll get another year. Nobody will be able to make the claims and stuff. It's like we can't help it. Brock Glenn didn't play against the Cupcakes on the schedule and didn't play all year and wasn't that sharp. It's just like they were never going to send him out there to throw at 30 teams and put on some offensive explosion. It just wasn't. It'd be an idiotic thing to do for something that's never been done in history. And there's literally no precedent, no excuse. Like it's just if Mike Norvell could go back in time, maybe sure he would have tried to throw it more and do all these things. And when Louisville's back was broken, we probably could have put up another 10, 15 points. But
there actually is a precedent for it.
Zero precedent. Zero.
Ohio State was in the same situation in 2014. They had to impress the voters, and they had a third-string quarterback who had never played.
But did they have a loss?
They lost.
They had a loss, but I'm talking about they were in the same position.
Well, that's not what we're talking about zero precedence.
And they had a third-string quarterback that needed to impress voters because they had to jump spots, and they beat Wisconsin 59-0.
Supporting our argument because they had a loss. And
I understand that.
A quarterback that hadn't proven anything.
But do you understand that I'm just showing you where their situations were analogous.
They had a loss.
If Florida State would have had a loss, then I would say they need to impress them.
That's not all
I'm talking about. We're talking about the performance of the quarterback and the situation that he was in. There is a precedent for that.
So Jalen Milroe had
a totally different situation. Like there's always been a precedent for whose quarterback is better. But when one current team has the loss and one doesn't, that's not equal. That's not.
I'm
That's
not
a
saying
totally.
the teams were equal or their records were equal. I'm
I'm not
talking about
saying you
the
are. I'm just
situation.
saying that's a totally different situation. There's zero. It's a not equal. One
The
loss completely changes
situation
it.
of the game is equal, that you're playing a conference championship game with a quarterback that nobody's ever seen play. And there was an injury, and they had to throw out a third string quarterback, and he lit it up.
So if Ohio State would have
I
been
mean, that's just
undefeated
like a
at that
random
point,
thing that happens.
What's that, Chris?
if Ohio State would have been undefeated to that point, and they'd have came out and won that game by 10 points, they wasn't good enough to get in. See, that
You're
other
asking
side
the
is
wrong
just
guy.
business.
You're asking the wrong guy, because I would have had Florida State in the playoffs. So I go by record and championships. So you're asking the wrong guy. I'm just telling you
When
what
you look at the
happened.
record, Ohio State had a loss. That's what we're. That's
Yeah,
what we're counting
I
at. It's a
understand
different.
that.
Like if they were undefeated, like it would be, But every single year you're parsing quarterback play. Like we're not sitting here arguing that
No, the
in this
point.
one game, Brock Glenn was the best quarterback and a playoff quarterback. It's the fact that you're undefeated. They've never left an undefeated conference champion out. That's the
Absolutely.
unprecedented part. They're
Absolutely.
undefeated. Like
Yes.
we're not arguing Brock Glenn should have been the Heisman or anything like that. It's just
No,
they're not equal thing.
the point
If
I'm
anything, that
making,
supports us because they lost to a team and still got in. But it's like,
yeah, the response that and there were multiple teams making it with one loss. So it was a different situation anyway, because there was just a different situation with a number of teams that had one loss that year. This was a year with 3 undefeated teams. That was a year with 1 undefeated team.
and they were trying to keep
and a
us
bunch of
out that
one-loss
year
teams.
too.
What's that?
And they were trying to keep us out that year.
Yeah, I don't know if they could have kept you out, I guess. So I don't know that they were
Going
trying
off
to
what
keep
they
you out.
did the very last year, they damn sure could have.
Well, they didn't though.
Yeah, exactly.
But
That's why it was
the point,
unprecedented.
I was responding to the conversation about the third string quarterback and that being unprecedented in regards to being in a championship game.
But I don't
having
think you
never
think I would
played.
say something so stupid as the first time ever a third string quarterback played in a conference championship game. Like I get what you're saying, but it's like it's just a different conversation.
And that
That
team's
similar,
playoff
yeah.
bid was on the line. That
Right.
was the point I was making.
For sure. Yep. For sure.
Falconer X is holding us up tonight. Thank you so much for that. I mean, holding us up in a good way, Falconer
I
X.
saw him say that Florida State got screwed and they should have been in. So I know he's a Miami fan, so we appreciate that.
Absolutely. Michigan over Florida State should have played Oklahoma in the 2001 Orange Bowl. Wait a minute. Oh, Miami over Florida State should have played Oklahoma in the 2001. But the problem there, Falconer, is that Washington beat Miami, and Washington was 11-1 as well. So Washington should have played Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl that year. You can always go that route too. So,
that is an interesting piece of precedence, though. Did we have 2001? We had a loss.
Yeah. Florida State Miami beat Florida State. Washington beat Miami.
A long time ago. I was just 10 years old.
Falconer X, thank you so much for that. Appreciate you being here. Maybe Chris dropped off because he wasn't able to come back. But Chris, thanks for dropping by. We appreciate it. Was not expecting necessarily for Chris to be here. So Chris, thanks for dropping by. I appreciate it. We appreciate it. Renegade Report.
Maybe.
I'm sorry, what's that?
I was just saying at Spear Addicts. Y'all go check Chris out for sure. They just did a show Monday. They got one Thursday. But yeah, the Renegade Report, we just had a show on Tuesday. We've got the Renegade Roast on Mondays. Friday, going to have my buddy Jesse from Plant the Spear on. Then we'll have our Sunday show. So staying super busy. Me and Mark did a spot on Monday talking about the stay in the North Carolina courtroom with Judge Bledsoe. So you can go check that out. I believe it's about 30 minutes. So just staying busy, man, keeping the content coming.
George, thanks for doing that, because I was out in the cold about what happened on Friday, and George bailed me out and filled in the blanks, and he listens to all that boring stuff and keeps up with it, and he's becoming a legal expert in the process. That's good.
That far.
That might be paying off for you at some point down the line, George.
Yeah, I wanted to be a lawyer when I was growing up. That's one of those things. That was the first one that, when you're a little kid, you run around and say. But But yeah, we didn't end up going that route. But it is fun to kind of dabble in it, kind of dip my toe in the waters. But yeah, expert, I don't know. I wouldn't go there. I'm working like my way to like paralegal level. Not even that. Those girls are badass. So excuse my language again, but we're getting there. Doug Rohan, Danielle Kelly, the different people throughout the months that have been helping me to learn. They've been great. So we're getting there. You can definitely go to Renegade Reporter at the Renegade Report right here on YouTube. And we've got dozens of different podcasts and videos, short videos and different things with all kinds of experts really breaking this thing down from the very beginning. So definitely go check that out.
George, thank you so much for everything that you do here at the Voice of College Football. The Renegade Reports on X, that's the handle. Obviously, it's right here on YouTube as well. It's just a click away. You might as well go there right now and check out what you missed over the last week or so. Just go directly from what we're doing. Keep the Florida State roll going here. George, we appreciate it. Thanks for holding things down again for us. Falconer X, thanks for the super chats, and we'll be moving on to the Miami show here directly. We will not be talking about the playoff situation with Miami, although a lot of people are forecasting it for this year, but that happens every year.
Let's see. Maybe this is the year. Maybe they're back. Maybe Cam can come rub our faces in it at the end of the year, but I'm going with my guy. I like the Noles. So unconquered, here we go. Back into 2024. I think folks are going to find out that it ain't sweet.
Vegas has Florida State, Miami, and Clemson all at 9.5 and very close on the odds.
Very close with one particular team on top, the Florida State Seminoles. But yeah, on the odds, I think it's Florida State's plus 270, and then it's like 300 for Clemson and Miami and those guys. So it's really close. At one point in time, it was like 270 to 280. We finally saw a bit of a line of demarcation there of about 30 points. So we will see how it goes, where it goes from here. But, Vegas usually is the best. When you look at the indicators, nobody's going to get it perfect, and you're always going to have changes. But year in, year out, those guys are pretty darn close. So
for sure,
it's like they agree with me more than anybody else. So hopefully they're right.
All right, George, we appreciate it. You have yourself a great rest of your week.
Absolutely, man. Go Noles, and we'll see you next time.